Welcome. This is the webinar on how to get the most out of the Axe DevTools browser extension. Harris Schneiderman is going to be taking us through the extension and touring all of the awesome features and functionality for you.
Thank you, Liz.
Yep.
And thanks for everyone for joining today. I'm really excited to demo some of our features in the Axe DevTools extension. So let's just go ahead and get started. I'm going to describe what's on the screen right now. I have my local recipe app server running on this left-hand side of my browser, and docked to the right is the Axe DevTools extension. You might be asking back up, what's the Axe DevTools extension? So if you go to deque.com/axe, you can find information about it and links on how to install it. It's a browser extension. It's embedded in the DevTools. It's available in Chrome, Firefox, and Edge. So we don't have a ton of time, and I got a lot of awesome stuff to show everyone, so I'm just going to get right into it. Right now, just some background. I'm in my DevTools. I have a lot of cool features enabled. I'm a pro user. I've logged in, but I'm going to break stuff down in terms of what's free for everyone, what's always going to be free, and what are some of the enhancements we've made that are actually behind the paywall, or I'll refer to as pro features. So yeah, let's get started. Right away, my attention is drawn to the scan all of my page button. That, believe it or not, is going to scan all of my page if I click on it. Next to that is a scan part of my page, which is a pro feature. And as it sounds, it actually allows you to target a specific element, maybe a reusable component you have, and isolate your testing just to that component. I'll be happy to demo that in a little bit, but we're going to get through some of the free stuff first. Below that, we have this section that says Start an Intelligent Guided Test. You probably are wondering what that is if you've never used them. I'm going to demo a couple of them and really explain in depth what they are for, how they can help you. But this is kind of a way to short circuit and get right into your intelligent guided testing if you're a pro user. So it's also a pro feature. But let's get started with the most powerful thing, I think, which is let's just scan all of the page. I'm going to click that button, and in a matter of a couple milliseconds, well, maybe a couple hundred milliseconds, we've got some automatic issues raised. It says 12 here. At the top, there's this rerun. I can keep rerunning that as much as I want. That's free, always will be free. Below that, we have a summary of the issues. So we have 12 total issues found so far, 8 critical and 4 serious. Beneath that, we have this export issues thing that, as it sounds, will export your issues, and that's also a pro feature. So we'll actually show that in a little bit as well. But below that, the important part are the accessibility issues that we found with Axe Core. Axe Core is an accessibility rules engine, which under the hood, if you're a developer and you're curious, when I clicked that scan on my page, we're literally just calling await axe.run, and we're making the results, the JSON results, pretty in some UI. So we have 2 categories of issues that we found on this recipe app. This is just a fun dummy page we use for demo purposes, and there are intentional accessibility issues. So we have a category of elements must have sufficient color contrast. And the other category is images that are missing alternative text. So let's take a look at some of the issue data that we have available here. We described the issue. In this case, it's color contrast, one of the more common issues, so I wanted to show it. But the cool thing here is also a free feature is highlighting it. So when I click this highlight button in the DevTools, again, it's docked to the right, so I can kind of have a nice side-by-side view. On the test page, we have a kind of a purpley ring show up around the element in question that has this color contrast violation, and as well as a useful tooltip that actually shows like the dimensions of the element, the accessible text, and in this case, the contrast ratio, which is 2.17 to 1. Given the size of this font, we would actually want that to be 4.5 to 1, which we will learn with some of this issue metadata. But before I show that, there's also an inspect feature, free. Will always be free, and it basically just pops you into the, in this case, we're in Chrome, so the Chrome Elements panel. And then next to that, we have a more info link. This more info link is super useful. It links off to a publicly available Deque University page. And this page is dedicated to the specific rule. So if you're ever confused by a rule, or maybe how to fix the problem, that information will be found on this page. You can share this with your teammates, regardless of whether they're using Axe extension to begin with. There's an awesome, for this specific issue, there's a cool color contrast analyzer. So you can play around with colors and you can see what the ratio is. And there's a bunch of other stuff here that's really useful. I like to think of Axe, because I mean, this is my personal experience. I think using a tool like Axe not only helps you find and fix your issues, but it actually kind of trains you with accessibility knowledge. So maybe you can prevent those issues from popping up in the future because you can learn from your mistakes, as you should always be trying to do. We also showed all sorts of interesting details, like the impact of each issue when it was found, how it was found, and which WCAG level if the given rule falls under. And then we got the CSS selector for it. We got the source code and a recommendation on how you might address this issue. So that's great. That's all free, and that will always be free. I just want to make that very clear because it's really powerful stuff that if you're not using already, you probably should, or a tool like this. So what I want to do next is I didn't want to ignore this last control. You might have seen it. It's called share issue. That is a pro feature that I'm going to get to demoing once I show a few other pro features. So let's do a really important step in this process of saving my results. As a pro user, I'm able to save these results so they'll be persistent. You know, I can go to lunch, come back, and those issues will be waiting there for me. If you're a free user, you kind of have to leave this open, and those issues aren't ever persisted to something like a database. So let's create a new test. I'm going to call it Awesome Recipes. That's the name of this app that we're testing. And so now I've got these issues saved. We can always go back to that same view that we were on that breaks down the issues. But now we're on a little more of an interesting screen. Right off the bat, I think this is an overlooked feature because it's in this kebab menu in the top right corner, probably the third or fourth tab stop from the beginning of the page. We have some metadata that we capture when the Axe scan runs. So stuff like the operating system and the browser you're using and the Axe core version that was run and your viewport dimensions. Kind of cool stuff if maybe your team has a couple different variations of your app based on viewport size, maybe using media queries, or you got a mobile only version. It's nice to have that information captured and persisted so you can come back to it. But I really want to get right into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, which is these guided tests. I mentioned at the beginning, they're called intelligent guided tests. From here on out, for time's sake, I'll probably refer to them with the acronym abbreviated IGT. And guided tests, you can think of them as, so Axe can, like automated tools like Axe can only find so much. A lot of times our fleshy human brains are needed to decipher what may or may not be an issue. A really basic example is you might have seen social media apps like Facebook and other tools that can automatically generate an alt text for an image. But a lot of times context matters. And so maybe some ML thing describing the contents of an image, even perfectly, might not really make sense in the context of the page. Maybe the description, woman waving to a crowd of people, might not be as useful as maybe on a website that actually describes who that woman is, because that's usually important information. Just an example. So that's where intelligent guided tests come into play. So Axe, on average, we've crunched the numbers on a ton of data, years worth of manual audit data. Axe can catch up to 57% of your accessibility issues. Obviously, that varies based on your page. If you have a really simple page, there's a chance that Axe could catch 100% of it. If you have a really complex page, maybe a lot less than that. But guided tests right now, with those same kind of numbers that we've crunched, can get you up to 83% coverage of your accessibility testing. And so really the idea behind them is it's usually a very focused set of questions. So we break them down kind of by widget or by concept, but it's a really basic yes or no questions, maybe point and click. It's always really simple. And the idea is you don't have to know anything about accessibility. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know the ins and outs of every single WCAG checkpoint. The bottom line is we'll do the heavy lifting for you. If you just answer a couple questions, you can get a ton of extra coverage in your accessibility testing. So with that being said, I want to showcase my personal favorite tool that we have. It's the keyboard tool. A quick little backstory I love to tell is I've been kind of focused on accessibility in the front end development game for a while. And as developers often do, I like automating things. And so I was always discouraged when I was first learning about, writing, maybe it's end-to-end tests, maybe unit tests where I automate some very specific accessibility checks. And I was bummed out because there's not a tool out there that I could find that would actually simulate the natural tab order of a real user tabbing through your page. Of course, if you're testing something like ARIA tabs widget and the tab heads actually all have individual JavaScript event listeners, I can simulate that event and it will actually shift focus and I can make all sorts of assertions there. But there was never really a tool that just, here's what it would look like for a user to tab through your page naturally. So that's what I'm going to do. That's what this tool does. I'm going to hit start here. And for those of you who can see my video feed, I'm going to put my hands up so you can tell that I'm not actually tabbing through the page. Our robots, our automation is actually going to be doing that for me. So without further ado, I'm going to let the tool do its thing. So my hands are up here. No tab key is being harmed during this process, I promise. But what's happening right now is I hit start. In the DevTools UI, there's a little loading animation breaking down what we're actually doing. And on the test page, beside that, we have the tab order being kind of visualized. So we're actually firing real tab strokes, and we show little numbers. So we got some tab sequence information. So while this is all happening, tons of screenshots are being taken. We're looking at the accessible names of each tab stop. We're looking at the roles that we calculate on each tab stop. But I think the coolest thing is we're actually analyzing the focus indication, whether it exists or whether it's sufficient. So a colleague of mine was really excited about this. He's blind and he does a lot of accessibility testing, and he always needed to phone a friend to do some of the focus indication analysis. So he relies heavily on this tool because we're actually able to analyze that automatically without a human intervention. So it actually saves a lot of time and actually can enable non-sighted users to do this test. So right now we're looking at the DevTools UI says 18 tab stops were recorded. Click next to continue. And it's asking me now if there are any elements that I expected to be in the tab order, but were not. So this gives us a chance to look at those 18 tab stops and see if there's anything that I expected to be there. In this case, everything that I expected to be in the tab order was. So I'm going to say no, nothing was skipped. So that kind of gives you an idea. Usually it's just really quick, easy questions like that. And as long as you kind of vaguely know the content you're testing, you can answer those questions pretty quickly and pretty easily. The next step is saying we've detected some elements in the tab order which lack a role, which indicates interactivity to assistive technology. That's a mouthful, but really what that means is it found some elements that don't have, like, let's say, a button role that were in the tab order. So them being focusable and in the natural tab order kind of indicates, hey, there's probably something interactive here, or maybe you're doing something wrong. So here's a chance for us to determine that. So for each of these, actually, it's these, we have these little pencil icons in the corner. We list all the recipes, and there's these, you can edit each recipe with this little pencil icon button. And so that one, this tool is saying, hey, there's something fishy going on here. So you need to tell us whether this element is either interactive, if it's a scrollable region, which scrollable regions need to be focusable, so sighted keyboard users can scroll through them, but it really wouldn't have necessarily an interactive role. And then the third option is element is neither interactive nor scrollable. So I am familiar with this content. Like I said, clicking these buttons actually fires a modal. So I'm going to leave element is interactive selected for all of these. Sweet. So we're done. I blabbered on a lot doing that, but it only took 3 minutes even with that. So no questions were too difficult for anyone to answer as long as you're familiar with the content. But let's look at what issues we found. So the test was completed by me, Harris Schneiderman. We found 16 issues. It took 3 minutes. We got this type of issue, which is the visual focus indicator is missing altogether. We can actually see that ourselves. I'm going to tab through the page. Right now, I am on the Mom Spaghetti edit button, but you can't tell because there's no focus indication. Pretty common thing that I've seen. Designers like to suppress those focus outlines, and that's bad. That's going to make it hard for certain users to use your page. And then the other type of issue we found was the elements role is missing or not appropriate for the elements function. So those same controls are actually have two different issues. No role, like button, it's supposed to have a button role, and no focus indicator. So let's hit save. We got our results saved. We found 16 issues. We're 100% done with our keyboard testing. Woo! We only have time. I would love to go through all of these. And if we do somehow have some time at the end, I'll go through more. But the last tool I want to show off is the structure tool. It's another pretty new tool we have. So I'm going to hit start. This really is going to test tons of kind of structural elements in my page. So we're going to start with headings, go through the various questions that surround headings. Then we're going to get into the page-wide language and maybe any other content that breaks out of the page-wide language. Then we're going to get into titles. So that's document title, iframe titles. We're going to get into application roles, which we don't use here, luckily, and some media elements. So let's get started. It says we have highlighted the one heading we found on your site. Do you see any that should not be headings? This is the H1 for the page. I think that's a pretty good call. Its text is recipe dashboard. I think that's a good structural H1. So it's asking me, is this basically not supposed to be a heading? In this case, everything looks good. I'm going to say nope. Next question is, are there any headings that were missed? And actually, each one of these recipe names in these recipe cards, or recipe tiles, or recipe repeaters, whatever you want to call them, I think they should be headings, because I think if I were to bring up like kind of a table of contents of this page, I want to see those as a kind of a section heading. I'd probably make them H2s actually. So I'm going to say yes, I can see some headings that you didn't highlight. You can actually tell, like, if you're not sure about structural headings, I like thinking of it like a table of contents, but actually a lot of times how they're styled might be indicative of what they are. And in this case, they're styled like headings, but they're not actually marked up as such. In this case, I'm on the next step, which is asking me to select each heading, and it's actually a div with the class heading. So a silly thing we see sometimes. So so it's going to have me point and click on each element that I've missed, but not everyone wants to use a mouse. Not everyone can use a mouse. So we're really excited to have this element selector at the bottom, so that'll be in the tab order past the field selected section. And it's really kind of a mini version of the elements panel in Chrome DevTools, but it allows you to select elements with just the keyboard, which is great. It's marked up like an ARIA tree, if you will. So it's like a proper tree view. So it's keyboard accessible. It's very screen reader friendly. We've actually, I think, added a few enhancements where we thought there were gaps for screen readers specifically with an off-screen live region. So we're really excited to allow anyone to select these elements. You don't need to use a mouse only. So what I just did was I used my arrow keys to open up the card element, and I kind of barreled down into the heading element, hit spacebar, made the selection. But you can also use it just like Chrome's inspect mouse button that's in the corner. You can also just point and click, like I said. So I'm going to do that real quick. Select all these missing headings. Each recipe should be a heading, and it was missed. So I'm going to select each one. I'm going to hit next. All right. Last question about headings. We have, does each heading accurately describe the content that immediately follows it? So let's review the text basically. We want to make sure that it's not too vague. It actually describes that kind of section that it's a heading for. So recipe dashboard, we've already established that's good. And then each of these are just the recipe name is the accessible text for each of the headings that I selected. And in that case, they're all great. So I'm going to leave yes selected. They all make sense. All right, so we're on to languages. Are there any additional sections of content which differ from the page-wide language? In this case, we don't have any translated content or anything. So I'm going to hit no and click next. Now we're on to titles. The page title is insert title here. Does it accurately describe the purpose of the page? That's bad. It was probably a templating error on my part or something. So the document title probably should not be insert title here. I'd probably give it something like awesome recipes. So I'm going to say no and hit next. All right, again, in 3 minutes, we found 9 issues. We have all these elements that act like a heading but are not marked up as such. We'd want to switch those div class headings to just plain old H2s, semantic HTML for the win. And then we have the title of the page does not identify the contents of the purpose. So I'm going to hit finish. We get some feedback to maybe zoom in more on here. I'll apologize for that. And this page is pretty zoomed in. I don't know if I want to go further than that. So we just ran through a couple IGTs. You get the idea. We go through other stuff like your modals, super exciting tool called the interactive elements tool that can actually test various states of your elements. It's really awesome. We have lists, images, and forms. Forms are very common, pretty powerful tests there. So what I want to do now is look at, let's just choose these keyboard issues. So I clicked on within the keyboard IGT tile, I clicked on 16 elements, and now I actually have the same issue view we saw from the start, but it's filtered by the keyboard issues specifically, so we can focus on those. Focus, no pun intended, of course. So what I want to do now is look at the share issue feature. The share issue feature, it can be accessed through this share issue button. And when I click on it, what happens is a dedicated page is generated for this specific issue. And I don't mean for this issue type, like we looked at the color contrast issue earlier. This is for my specific issue on this page. We made it just for you. So it's not like generically all focus indicator missing will have the same page. This is actually for this element and for the specific tab stop. So what it did was generated that page and copied its link to my clipboard. I can open up a new tab and paste it in. The reason this is so cool is that we have a element info. We have the description of the issue. We have how you can fix it. Some of this should look familiar as what we render in the extension. But the cool thing is this is a dedicated page. You can like paste it into your issue tracking, and it's open to your whole team. So you don't need to be like if you're not an Axe user and maybe your QA wants to see this issue, you can share this with them and they'll have access to it, whether they're an Axe user, a pro user, or not at all. So anyone can access this information. Really cool stuff. So on a similar note, like we're talking about issue tracking, maybe how you triage your issues is more like a Jira-like system, and that's where this export button comes into play. So I'm going to hit export, and it's allowing me to choose which issues I'd like to export. Again, this is a pro feature, and let's just export our keyboard issues. So I can choose JSON or CSV, hit export, and sure enough, a download of a CSV happens. So for, let's say, Jira, you could actually take that CSV, import it into your project, map various columns in the CSV, which are coming from the Axe DevTools extension, to whatever kind of custom fields you have in your given Jira configuration, and you can be on your way triaging your accessibility issues. So we've just reviewed how we raise issues and how we can share them with our team. I did want to mention some awesome configuration we allow in the extension. So I actually just hit the kebab menu. It's called more info, accessible name wise, and settings was the link I clicked, and we can now actually select which WCAG level we want to be testing for. So if you're really trying to go back to the basics, you can click on WCAG 2.0 single A. If you want to do double A, that's what we recommend. You can actually select all. But the really cool thing here is no matter what you choose, we actually save all issues regardless of what WCAG level you have selected, and we just filter them out based on your selection. So if you do maybe want to start with baby steps and choose something smaller like single A, and then you're like, you know what, I want to go above and beyond and hit triple A up, you can actually flip that switch back on. More issues will appear. And beyond that, we actually have a select Axe core version control now. So you can actually choose an old version of Axe, let's say 3.5. But by default, the latest is selected, and that's what we recommend, because when we ship new enhancements to Axe, you'll automatically get that without having to go back into the settings page and select the newer version. Awesome. So we've been over a lot. I have one or two more things I want to go through. So again, we have Axe got us 57% of the way there on average. If we ran all the IGTs, we'd be 83% on average through our accessibility testing, which is great. But there's still some gaps to fill, and we're always trying to improve the coverage we give through our intelligent guided tests. But we also have this content that's a catch-all for the rest. So this is dynamic content based on what our IGTs cover, and it's actually just kind of a quick list of the additional testing needed to get to that 100%. So if you run Axe like I just did, you run all the IGTs and you go through all this content, you have full coverage of your accessibility testing. If you're doing something like a VPAT, let's say, you can safely say that you covered all your bases. And it looks like we're pretty good on time, so I can keep diving in a little deeper. So we actually break it down by which type of tests you need. There's site-wide tests, there's page tests, and then there's page state tests. All the content looks like this. It's broken down into a nice kind of documentation style layout with headings and lists. But the cool thing is if you click on, let's just read through this content. It's saying test number 1, automatic behavior. And again, sorry, I didn't describe this. This opened up a brand new tab. We're not in the extension anymore. We're actually in the Axe web app. But it says, does any content update automatically? Pay special attention to components such as carousels and message feeds. And then you can say, oh, yes, I have that. Can the user pause, stop, or hide these updates or control their frequency? And if not, it says raise an issue. And then we actually link to the this checkpoint. And it says content carousel unstoppable, because I just said, you know what, it's actually we can't pause it. And the coolest thing here is we actually have a copy and close button. So you can copy this information to your clipboard. And I don't have an issue tracking system open right now, but let's pretend I'm there. I have a little text field here and you can paste it in. As you can see, it actually copied all the information in that modal. So we have issue description, proactive text, short text, and all the impact profiles, including which checkpoint this falls under. So that's really, we did that format intentionally because it kind of looks like what people usually put into their issues, into their tickets. So this is a kind of a quick way to get that pulled into your issue tracking system. I've gotten through a lot of this. I'm actually glad, and I think we have enough time to run one more tool, if that's okay. I'm going to go to a different page though, something with more states. So I just in my recipes app, I'm back in my my testing bed here, where I have my recipes app and my DevTools, and I'm on this awesome recipe settings page. So it's a page where you can choose which food allergies you have. But the reason I'm here is because it's actually a very stateful page. We have custom checkboxes, which you probably shouldn't do, but a lot of people do. These aren't using native input type checkboxes. These are just using role checkbox, hopefully. So I have a checked and unchecked state there, and actually have an advanced settings, expand, collapse button too. So there's an expanded state and a collapse state. So let's go ahead and start this interactive elements tool. Okay, start. And cool. So it says, hey, we've highlighted the 7 interactive elements we could find. Are there any we missed? And it looks like it got both of my top bar items. It got each of the checkboxes, and it got the advanced settings button and the submit button. So everything's looking great. So I'm going to say, no, there's nothing we missed. All right, so it's capturing a quick screenshot here. And it's grouped my elements intelligently right now. We use various heuristics to try to group similar elements. So it found this whole checkbox group as one, and it has kind of a miscellaneous pile here at the bottom. We can actually group by role if we want. It'll put all the links together. It'll put all the checkboxes together and all the buttons together. But really what this question is driving at is it allows you to select which elements you want to test. Maybe you're doing a quick spot check on the custom checkbox that you just updated, so you just want to test one of them. We let you do that. We're not here to cause any barriers for you. We want you to test what you need to test. Let's just focus on this advanced settings button because it has some states that I want to show off. So it's in the collapse state right now, keep in mind. All right, so I'm testing my one of one element, and it's having me validate the accessible name, role, and states of this element. So got a screenshot of it, got a thumbnail. I can hover over it or focus it to highlight it to refresh my memory of what I'm testing. It actually prints out the accessible name, which is advanced settings. It prints out the calculated role, whether it's explicit or implicit, whether I'm using a button tag or a role button in its button. And it says states, and no states were found for this element. So first thing it asks is, hey, is that accessible name accurately, or does it accurately describe the element's meaning? In this case, yes, advanced settings does perfectly describe what the control is for. And in this case, it's a button, so I don't have to change this, but it does say you can select the role which accurately conveys the element's purpose. This thing acts like a button, looks like a button, it must be a button. But this is what I wanted to focus on here, is this element state section. So right now we're in the resting or initial state, or whatever state I started this test off in. And keep in mind, as I described, the settings button right now is in the collapse state. So what I want to do is look through all these states. We have disabled, we have pressed, expanded, selected, checked, read only, and we can actually select the applicable states. So expanded is applicable, and right now it's in the collapse state. So I can actually inform the tool of that. But that's not the end of it. If I want to test the expanded state, I can actually click this test another state for this element button. So I'm going to click that and see what happens. So it's saying, hey, go ahead and put that element into the new state, and then click check element state when ready. So I'm going to go back over to the test page, expand that control, and click check again. So now I have a new state here printed out. This is the additional state that I'm testing. And once again, the expanded state wasn't found. So I'm actually going to inform the tool that we need to mark this up as an expanded control. And sure enough, I'm done with my testing, and we should have 2 issues, one for the missing collapse state, which we would actually accomplish via RE expanded equals false, and one for the opposite, which would be RE expanded equals true. So I'm going to finish and show off one last little thing before we get into questions. So for the interactive elements tool, let's look at one of these issues. All the same information that we saw with the ACTS and the other intelligent guided test issues is there. But we're actually starting to roll out some new content that is very, very smart in that it takes what we learn in from the page while you're running your tests, and it generates a recommendation to fix based on what we found. So here it's saying when it's collapsed, we need to apply the following states to the element. RE expanded equals false. So it's actually telling you which attributes to add and which ones to maintain. And so for the expanded state, we should see something telling us to put RE expanded equals true on it. So this is a cool way that you can test multiple states of your page in one tool run and get some really useful information on how to fix that issue.